Welcome, AI curious folk, to AI Ramblings Daily Podcast with me, Michael Parekh, your human AI guide. This is episode 113, Tuesday. Again, as usual, a lot going on. Let's get started. Today's theme, what's in a name? The names and definitions that we're all constantly reaching for across the AI space. First, the branding of Elon's SpaceXAI. I have a few things and a couple of takes around that. Second, Anthropic's words and concepts, naming efforts to truly understand how their latest models work relative to the human mind. So a lot to unpack there. And third, a lot to redefine around how China's open source models are being used in the US by companies as they also at the same time adopt aggressively OpenAI's and Anthropic's latest models and the big price gaps between the two, closed versus open, and all those definitions of those words. So let's get into it. On each one of them, I'll go through my individual takes and then my overall take. First, SpaceXAI. So there is a rebrand here from XAI, long signal by Elon Musk. It's been a long road built by him over the changing stories from Twitter to X to XAI to SpaceXAI to now just simply SpaceXAI, capital AI. So a lot of changes, a new logo, by the way, you can look at it all in the source notes and there's a video and everything. All the while, this is still in orbit around Tesla and its name recognition with the eponymous Tesla, the fellow who competed with Edison and lost in electricity over 100 years ago. And all of this is still being driven by Elon Musk on his cadence. Every one of those name changes is aimed at the same trajectory out there. Along the way, we have Terafabs and Space AI data centers with a lot of other AI objectives here on Earth along the way. We're talking, of course, of Optimus humanoid robots and robotaxis in the tens of millions over time and beyond. So AI, all of this is driven, of course, by Elon's vision of it, of how AI can propel him toward his North Star, and by how his never-ending narratives keep driving his boundless ambitions and changing and evolving, of course, to a spot marked X, which was the key name all along, and him leading the way, a digital Pied Piper of the 26th century. So that's our first item to discuss. Second, we're going to move to Anthropic's work on what they're calling Claude's J-Space. This is a new piece that they just put out. I'll have the links in the show notes. There's a very must-watch video, YouTube video definition by Anthropic, which also, it's a short one, 5.5 minutes. I would recommend it if you're struggling as an AI curious person to truly understand how AI models work when they're modeled on how the human brain works. And somehow we've taken the language that humans understand to convert ideas into reasoning and everything that we do. And there's some bare approximation of this in the mathematical matrix calculations that are done in the AI GPUs by NVIDIA and others. And Anthropic does a wonderful job describing this complexity in mainstream language, in my view, with actually in the video, very good images as well. And really cuts across why this technology of probabilistic AI is very different than the deterministic computing that we've had for over 60 years. And this is something that when I talk about AI to mainstream folks, this is a thing that everyone kind of nods at, but they don't really get because it's complicated and there's some math involved. But this J-space definition, the names that they're using for the workspace, etc., goes a lot further than other explanations I've seen on this. So I would highlight this discussion by Anthropic. I think it moves the ball forward in communication to regular people about what this is. There's still some technical stuff here, but it is important to understand. And this is all about a deeper point that is illustrating that language is just an approximate gateway. How our brains really work is beyond language, as a lot of scientists have theorized, and we still are barely understanding how our human brain works. But we're we've somehow converted that into massive amounts of math, matrix math in particular, that's then calculated upon with immense hardware and software, which is the stuff that's going into the data centers at costs of hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's what's making all this kind of stuff work. And when you start to get a true understanding of this, we understand that there is a delineation between machines and humans, that we should not be anthropomorphizing the machines, even though they seem to be thinking, seem to be reasoning. Those are human words, language, our names for these processes. They're roughly applied to the matrix math that's being done. And sometimes it leads us astray, thinking these things are sentient, and they're not. They're just doing incredible things that are still very surprising, but they're far beyond stochastic parrots, which is another phrase that's been talked about in terms of definitional terms. So again, I would, without getting too much into it, as you can see, I'm very excited about these ideas, and I can talk about it for probably too long, but do take a look at this paper by Anthropic and just a YouTube video and the 5.5 minutes. I think it's worth it. Third thing I want to talk about today is no language barriers between US and Chinese AI models. Two things, I've said this often, two things can be true at the same time. On one side, OpenAI and Anthropic will keep charging premium a la carte prices for their top-end frontier models once the government lets them kind of go free and run and go aggressively across the world, selling their advanced models at ever higher prices, even as they come down in prices on an aggregate basis, as they make these things more efficient on both on the software and the compute level. And then businesses and developers will keep paying for these advanced models in the billions. Anthropic is already at a $50 billion revenue run rate as of last month. And between these two companies, OpenAI and Anthropic, they're probably on a $100+ billion revenue run rate in the next 12 months, all, in time for their each mega AI IPOs, $1 trillion plus each is what they're hoping for. And they'll likely capture the majority of the economics of the AI model business, at least for the next 2 or 3 years. Conversely, open source models, and I've written a lot about this, especially from China, but also from the US, from companies like NVIDIA and Apple and a bunch of others, will take the majority of the non-financial metrics of the usage of AI. And what's going on here are businesses, once they figure out how to use the latest and greatest models for their various business applications, for developers, etc., then they go to the open source models, which are cheaper, non-metered, and can be run on local and AI data center compute, and then really deploy these applications at scale. And there are advantages beyond cost and price, unmetered and otherwise, on doing that. They can customize these things. They can truly build a lot of privacy and intellectual property protections around their businesses' core assets. And that all is helped a lot by open source models. And despite the regulatory tussles in terms of the US-China geopolitical kerfuffles that, hey, the open source models can be dangerous, etc. The reality is open source in the traditional software world basically drives over 80 to 90% of everything we've done in computing for decades. The internet is mostly open source, believe it or not. And so open source has a big role to play. It's just that we've got to separate the percentage of the value that's captured on an economic basis versus the percentage of actual usage in overall compute measured in technical operational terms, in terms of the amount of compute they're driven. And both can coexist and share. And that definition is important to understand and keep in our mind over the next 2 or 3 years, as we are constantly bombarded with higher prices a la carte from the top frontier models, and then ever increasing usage of open source models from China and otherwise across the world for AI things. So the overall take here is that the theme, what's in a name, runs across this gamut, from how SpaceX is getting rebranded and Elon's ambitions on AI, which obviously run across just a huge portfolio of product services, both here on the ground and out there in space. The attempts by not just Anthropic, but all the AI companies to understand and then explain the innards of how these models work so that we can better interpret things, explain things, audit things, monitor things, make sure they're within the guardrails, safe, secure, that we can protect the world from cybersecurity risks. All of this is very critical to understanding how these things truly work and how we can explain it, not just to AI researchers, but to people beyond. And so that is a key aspect of what's going on. And then the naming and definition of the financial language of open source versus closed models, and understanding why both can be popular at the same time and will grow at very aggressive rates, but over the next 2 or 3 years at least, until all of this stuff gets more mature and figured out. So these are the core ideas I wanted to just leave with you today. Let's move to the Gadget AI section of today's discussion, which is the privacy issues of AI smart glasses. There was another great piece on this at The Verge, which I will leave in the show notes. But the core idea is, as over the next couple of years, we're going to see millions of smart glasses, not just from Meta, which I've talked about in recent days, but also Google and Amazon. Apple has their own glasses coming. There are huge privacy concerns around this, and there's a whole family of AI wearables, especially ones with cameras, etc., that are all being introduced. And there's a long history of these gadgets for going back 2 decades or more, all inspired by a lot of science fiction going back over almost 100 years, whether it's books or movies, etc. I'll have some links of some of this history, rich history of movie references, book references, how these things got translated into products, even things like Google Glass over a decade ago that looked amazing, had a lot of promise, and then all of a sudden collapsed because of societal concerns about creepiness of the cameras and spying and all of these myths and mythologies. These are products that are technologies for technology's sake for the most part, and are still looking for their true product market fit. There's a huge amount of social user interface experience aspect that has to be worked out, even as these things are being sold for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, and will be sold in millions of units, which sounds like a lot, but we're living in a world with over 5 billion people using smartphones in a population globally of 8 billion. So the numbers are going to get very big, and there's going to be a lot of experimentation around all this. But I'm generally optimistic that we will directionally find a net positive, despite the privacy and trust concerns around these sci-fi driven visions of AI smart glasses, pun intended. Let's get to the questions of the episode today. One of the things that always asked is, what am I looking forward to most in a camera-driven AI capabilities in glasses and AirPods? And here, the context-driven journaling, especially on a private basis, translated into usable data that I can use or people can use on their daily activities. That's above and beyond the data that's captured in the language models that we use, whether they're closed or open. That's the valuable thing. This is the new data, the stuff that we live with every day that doesn't get captured in any database of record or otherwise. And that is the real attempt that I think is constantly worth it to experiment with these devices to somehow capture and then leverage in the next iterations of AI technologies, whether they're driven by the large language models and data centers or smaller models on our devices locally. And so that is what I continue to be optimistic about. The concerns, which is the second question, what do I worry about in terms of the same capabilities, is of course that we end up with billions of AI agents running around carrying the personal context of millions and billions of people, mostly misunderstood and misused. How do regulators deal with this? What data relative to our expectations of privacy, once they're in a digital domain captured across the world, how much protection and rights that we have get eroded? These are huge issues that will not be solved overnight, just with technology, with gadget A versus gadget B, but will be figured out by society over time. And that's why these are 10, 20-year time curves. But all that said, I'm still optimistic on the directionality of all this and this stuff being relatively a net positive over time. Okay, that is our show. I just wanted to also highlight episode 1140 of AI Research Zero, which got published today. It's a post-mortem discussion analysis of Anthropic's The Blip 2.0, which was their 3-week government stoppage of their latest Fable and Mythos models, which is now slowly being lifted. So there's a lot of implications, and the Blip 2.0, in my view, is still continuing. Just there's still more speed bumps and speed limit changes in terms of the frontier models. And those are all important to be watching for this year for a whole bunch of reasons I've talked about. So I hope all of that is useful. Tomorrow, of course, we will have AI Ramblings 114 and Reset to Zero 1141. I want to thank you all for joining us, AI curious folk. Stay tuned.